Everybody, this is Reed of Imprint Tours for another installment of Where in the World. And today we're going to take you to the Danube River cruise that we offer this fall and usually every fall. Waiting for the pandemic to be over to get launched on that again. We've started our Danube week with a number of fun things. We had Ben Curtis at the beginning of the week. We had Martin Sloboda from Bratislava, which is the castle is behind my head here. But today I'm just going to go day by day through the Danube cruise that we have on offer. So let's go ahead and just get started with that. Well, actually, let me say this. If you have comments, I'm not going to be able to monitor those while I'm speaking the whole time. But of course, questions and comments are more than welcome in the chat function. I will respond to those when I'm done. And yeah, I guess that's it for logistics. Let's get my screen sharing here, and then we should be good to go. We need to. There we go. All right, so the tour begins in Salzburg, Austria. By the way, let me say a word about Imprint's approach to river cruising. This is something we started about 6 years ago. And the typical way a river cruise is set up is you sign up for the cruise, they market a great deal for you. I know that some of the bigger outfits will offer 2-to-1, but of course the price ends up being the same any way you do it. And then when you're on the cruise, if you want to do shore excursions, you pay extra. There's a whole package you can buy for the entire cruise. And then, of course, they sell you an expensive add-on at the end. At Imprint, we want to include everything. We don't want any upselling going on during the tour. We don't want any hidden cost. So our Danube cruise, which is 8 days up and down the Danube, pre-cruise, we have a couple of nights in Salzburg, and then post-cruise, we have 3 nights in Prague and Český Krumlov in the Czech Republic. Those are completely included. And then in terms of the excursions, when we land at each stop, we have contracted with local guides that I or my team have hand chosen, and we've got a tremendous resource available to us from all of my years at Rick Steves. My colleagues from Rick Steves are usually our local guides that we're using at these stops, rather than on a typical cruise. The guide that shows up to take a group off of a boat is just the next person on the list of guides in a local place, and sometimes they're great and sometimes they're not, but you can always count on having really good hand-picked local guides for all your destinations. So enough background. This is Salzburg, and dominated by Hohensalzburg Castle there at the top, and the mighty Salzach River that flows through the center of town. I think, sorry, I'm going the other way. Many of you have been to Salzburg, but those of you who haven't, it's an absolutely delightful town. I guess you could call it a city, a small city. The historic center, which is tucked up underneath the fortress there, and the Monchberg big ridge that runs along, it creates a tiny little enclave next to the Salzach River. And so that historic center is very small and easily handled. You walk everywhere you go. This image showing you now is on the opposite side of the river. This is the Mirabel Gardens, right? Very, very famous Baroque gardens. And I love this shot because it shows you how the gardens were specifically laid out to create a bel composto, as they like to say in Italy during the Baroque period, right? A beautiful combination, right? They've used the building on the left, the nature on the right, trees and a hedge, and then they've sculpted the flora in the foreground. There's a fountain in the middle, and what I want to call your attention to is even the iron gates at the beginning are part of the view. The view down through the garden takes you right to the castle on the other side. These were laid out with that specifically in mind. And as you get down at the end of the gardens, I don't believe I have a picture, but down there where there are trees, there's a series of statues, and they're lined up in just such a way, and they're posing in just such a way to sort of point you further along down toward the castle. This was all taken into account, all designed on purpose, and it's all classic Baroque, where you want to pull everything all together, not just a single medium, not just statues, not just the garden, not just the building, the architecture, but everything all pulled together in a bel composto. Here's the view I showed you at the beginning, so we can move on from there. By the way, the church on the left is the mighty Salzburg Cathedral. Oh, sorry, I keep going the wrong direction here. Here we go. Here's the Salzburg Cathedral, the facade. Not super impressive, but I do want to again point out the Baroque elements here, not just of the architecture, but of the entire design. In the courtyard in front of the cathedral is this big statue, and it's of the Virgin Mary. Very, very important. And you'll see, let's see, I can use my pointer. You'll see that there is actually a crown here. The crown is on the facade of the church, a couple of wings on either side of the crown, and those are angels, hard to make out, but those are angels that are lowering the crown down on the Virgin Mary's head. Here's a better shot, right? So if you stand in the right place, this bel composto creates this almost moving image of Mary and the crown being lowered on her head. Now, I say almost moving, it literally does move. There are tracks marked on the ground, and as you walk along the tracks, you approach the statue in the foreground, and literally, as you move forward, the crown is lowered down onto Mary's head. So it's just a wonderful element of a visit to Salzburg. And how do I know these things? Because we've got a fantastic local guide, as I was saying before, Brigitte. She is fantastic at opening up this whole Baroque world for you of Salzburg. Of course, Salzburg is the home of Mozart. He was born here. He spent most of his composing days in Vienna at the court of the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs were to music what the Medici were to the visual arts, to painting and sculpting in Renaissance Italy. The Habsburgs, the great patrons of music, and of course, that attracted Mozart to the capital. One more time with this beautiful shot of the Salzach River in the front. By the way, Salzburg, the name of the town means salt town, right? And Salzach is the salt river, right? The wealth of Salzburg, and it was considerable, comes from the salt mines in the area. And by the way, if you arrive a day early for the tour, there are salt mine tours available. That's always a fun excursion. I like this shot because I always appreciate a town that doesn't stand strictly on its laurels, its historical laurels. Yes, there's all those beautiful historical things to see in Salzburg, Mozart's birth house, the beautiful cathedral, other churches, Hohensalzburg Castle up on top there. But here's a modern art installation in one of the squares. And notice here, right in the center, this is like a stage scaffolding, because in Salzburg in the summertime, all the spring through fall, there is always some sort of festival activity going on in Salzburg, whether that's music or theater or something, and very, very often out in the public squares, especially in the summertime. Just very, very fun. This is just a different perspective on the old town and the fortress up on the hill. But I like this because one of the things I absolutely recommend people do in their free time, and of course there will be at least a free afternoon for personal explorations, as there is on all of our tours when we can manage it. There is a ridge that runs from the castle all the way around. Like I said, it basically encloses the old town, the Mönchberg, it's called, right? Literally the monk's mountain. It's not a mountain, it's really just a ridge, but you can take a funicular up at the castle and walk all the way around along on the Mönchberg with all these beautiful views down below. There's a number of restaurants up there with beautiful terraces for a sunny day like the one in this picture. to just sit and have a coffee and maybe a Linzer or a Apfelstrudel, classic Tyrolean fare, and look down over the city. This is actually from the fortress, right at the top of the funicular, looking back down again. Front and center there is the cathedral again, the little square. Below it is where that modern art installation of the globe with the man on top was sitting. Mirabel Gardens are here where you see the trees on the other side. This is the Mirabel Palace here, if you can see where my cursor is, just to give you some perspective. This is just a picture of one of my groups having dinner at a venue where they're having selections of Mozart operas being played in between the courses of the dinner. It's a classic evening. It's available every night during the tourist season, from May through to October. And it's just one of many. If you absolutely want to have an evening of music in some way, there are concerts in the Mirabel Palace. There's concerts up at the Hohensalzburg Fortress. There are concerts in the churches. There is music everywhere all the time in Salzburg. So always a fun thing to do. When we're ready to leave Salzburg, we hire a coach. Here is Salzburg down in the south at the beginning of my track that shows our driving. And we drive to Passau, which is right on the Danube. You can see the Danube River here, squiggles its way off to the east. Sorry, I did that wrong. Here's the Danube. It comes down here through Linz and off towards Vienna. So here is the Danube, if you can follow my cursor. But before we leave Salzburg, we have our own private Sound of Music tour, right? I'm sorry. This is our destination, right? In Passau. That's where we get onto our Amadeus river cruise boat. This is the Amadeus Royal, I believe. But it depends on what time of year we travel, which boat we get, but they're all quite spectacular. I've got lots of pictures to show you in a moment. So that's our destination. But before we go, we want to have our own private Sound of Music tour, which was, of course, filmed around Salzburg. Here's some of the things I've been showing you. Hohensalzburg Castle. This is the church, St. Michael's in Mondsee, top left corner, where the wedding takes place. There's a number of things that take place in the Mirabel Gardens that you can see here in the bottom right-hand corner. So we stop, we hire a local guide who does these Sound of Music tours every day, comes right on our bus, takes our microphone, and takes us to all these sites where this sort of movie that we all grew up loving was filmed. This is the private residence out in the countryside that one side of which poses as the Von Trapp family mansion from the movies. It's privately owned. We can't visit it, so you just take pictures across the river. Here's the St. Michael's Church in Mondsee. This is where when Captain Von Trapp and Maria get married, the wedding takes place inside this church. Beautiful Baroque interior, lovely little town all around there. And after we have our morning Sound of Music private tour, then it's about a 3.5-hour drive up to Passau, crossing the border into Germany. If there's extra time before we need to jump onto our river cruise boat, we sometimes will visit the beautiful St. Stephen's Cathedral, another Baroque masterpiece there in Passau. Once we get on the boat, here is our route. Starting in Passau, we cruise downriver. Melk Abbey is our first stop. Then we spend a full day in Vienna, and then we continue on to Budapest, where we spend a day and a half and 2 full nights there in Budapest. And then we return, coming back the other way, stopping in Bratislava, where our friend Martin is. Linz is our last stop on our way back to Passau, where we are picked up. And here's a much better map than the one I had to show you how close Salzburg is to the beginning of the tour in the cruise in Passau. And then you can also see that it's just a 3/4 of a day drive in a bus to end up in Prague, where we finish up the cruise. The Amadeus Cruise Line. I have a very good relationship with them. They take really good care of us. Just as an example, they print up a daily program for our groups every day. These boats are stunningly beautiful. They're all fairly new, or they've been refitted recently. This is the bar lounge area where many people will spend some time. This is where we have our 3 meals a day during the cruise. This is a layout of all of the cabins, right? The only cabins that are any different than what you see on the screen right now are the suites, right? But all 3 levels of cabins are exactly the same. The only thing that changes is how high you are in the boat and how big your windows are. This is the worst cabin on the boat. This is the Haydn level. This is the lowest level on the boat. And you can see that you get a decent sized window, not a little porthole. The only issue is that when you look out that window, you are right at water level. If you want to be higher up, you have to pay more. That's the way the river cruise industry works. Every day, the staff takes super good care of us. There's always some sort of beautiful folded blanket or towel on your bed. Every day it's different. I don't know how they come up with such creative designs. The meals are off the charts good. Always choices involved. They'll accommodate special dietary needs. Desserts are amazing. Breakfast buffet, again, off the charts. You're there on the boat for an entire week. You'll have the same wait staff every day. You start to get to know them quite well. It becomes very personal. And one of the nicest features of Amadeus Cruise Line is that there's unlimited wine with dinner every night, right? The wine gal or guy comes to your table, tells you what the choices are, and it's always been matched up with the cuisine for the evening. It's just a nice touch. They, when the weather's nice, they open up the bar up on the roof deck, which is where a lot of people want to spend time. I have to admit, the first time we did this cruise 6 years ago, we didn't have much luck with the weather. You see everybody's bundled up and there's an overcast sky, but we still had a fantastic time. All right. The first cruise stop is Milk Abbey, right? This just absolutely beautiful cloister. We have a guided tour there. This is the interior courtyard, and it is truly spectacular. This is a map that shows you how it's laid out. Over on the left is the Wachau Valley. I'll show you a view of that in a minute. We park the bus, we walk down, and then we go through the entire copy looking out to the Wachau Valley. This is what it looks like inside. It's just an explosion of energy and light and beauty. The high altar, all very classic late Baroque Rococo. I sometimes describe Rococo as Baroque on steroids. This is the interior cupola looking up inside the church. Really something. I believe this is the library ceiling. You can see this is just a beautiful stop on the cruise. Then we cruise through the night and arrive in the morning in Vienna, where we spend an entire day. Vienna is, if I had to choose a single word to describe Vienna, it would be imperial, right? Vienna is the seat of the Habsburg empire would be the wrong word. Dynasty, right? The Habsburgs made love, not war. The way they expanded their influence in Europe was strategic marrying of their offspring, right? Maria Theresa, one of the big guns of the Habsburg dynasty, had 11 children, all of whom were married off to various heads of Europe, Marie Antoinette being one of the most famous, right, who was married off to the King of France and later lost her head in the Revolution. But and then her one of her sons or grandson, I'm sorry, was Joseph II. If you remember the movie Amadeus, he's the goofy emperor who told Mozart that his opera had too many notes. Anyway, this is the Hofburg, right, the imperial palace complex of Vienna. This is one of those imperial buildings from the 19th century that has been converted into the Great National Art Gallery for Vienna. This is a statue of Maria Theresa, whom I had mentioned. It's from behind. She's facing the other way, but the sun was bad for my photograph there. This is the Albertina. You know, this is to say that it's a complex. It's almost like a little imperial city within the city there. All these beautiful buildings. The Albertina, as you can see here, they've got a Picasso exhibit when I took this picture. These are rotating exhibits going on inside here. St. Stephen's Cathedral, right? The great Gothic cathedral of Vienna. While we're there, we use one of our great local guides. If maybe last week some of you might have tuned in and heard my interview with Gerhard that we use regularly in Vienna, absolutely brings that city alive for us. While we're there in Vienna, we'll have a morning of sightseeing. We'll have a walking tour of the historic center, and then there's so many things to choose from. I can't promise you exactly what we will do in addition to the walking tour, but very, very often we have a tour of the Great State Opera House. That's this image. As I said, there's this heritage of music of the Habsburgs and the Viennese. The Austrian government has continued with that. This opera is heavily subsidized by state taxes. So that everybody who wants to go to the opera can afford to go to the opera. It's not something just for the elites. Oops, sorry, still going the wrong way. This is the interior of that opera house, absolutely opulent. This is Wolfgang, another one of our great local guides, giving one of our groups a tour of the interior. This is fascinating, right? Because every day they have a different opera there. They don't have an opera that runs for 3 weeks or 6 weeks and then they change sets. Every day they're changing the sets in there. So any day that you go in and have a tour, you're going to really see them transforming the interior and getting ready for the next opera. One of the other things that we usually do is to go through the state treasury, right? The Habsburg treasury. This is their version of the crown jewels. I believe that is the Hungarian crown there. This is the crown of the Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Emperor's seat, if you will, is held by a Habsburg almost without exception for several hundred years. So it's kind of the province of the Habsburgs themselves. Of course, the Holy Roman Empire was started by Charlemagne in 800 AD. So it's a venerable old line of feudal dominance. This is the Holy Roman Empire crown. This is not the best picture that I have to show you, but it's an important one. This is the Rathaus, right? The city hall of Vienna. It's a 19th century neo-Gothic building. I wanted to show you because I've now reached that point in my PowerPoint here to talk about the things that you would do with your free afternoon in Vienna. And during the summer, every night, they set up a huge screen in front of the Rathaus, and they show a video of some important orchestra performance, opera, something like that. Usually the Viennese Philharmonic. It's world class. It is a recording. It's not live music, but it's free, right? They set up a food court out front. You go, you find yourself a little food, you sit up in the bleachers, the sun goes down, and they start up, and it's really a fun, free activity that's available. Schönbrunn Palace, right, is the Habsburg summer residence when they wanted to get out of the heat of the inner city. Of course, now Vienna has grown up to encompass Schönbrunn. This is the Glorietta, right, out at the end of the gardens. Like Versailles in France, I think that the gardens are always the most impressive and most enjoyable part of these palace complexes, because as you go through, of course, it's impressive. The opulence, the luxury, the refinement is present in every room. So much so that you start to become just weary of it. I mean, that's my personal take, but I always love wandering around in the gardens. I mentioned the National Gallery there, the Kunsthistorische Museum. I showed you the exterior in an earlier shot. This is a Peter Bruegel painting. It's a really lovely, lovely collection of art. If you're into art, that's something you could do in your free time. If your tastes run to more modern things, Gustav Klimt was a favorite son, and many of his paintings are prominently featured in a number of places in the city. And then my choice for a free time activity in Vienna is to just go into a classic coffee house, right? To go in, get a coffee, and they'll always serve you a glass of tap water, which is very, very good in Vienna. And read a book or a newspaper. There's newspapers available for you. And this is like Vienna's sitting room, right? Most Viennese live in small apartments. They don't have a lot of room. And so the Viennese coffee house experience is a quintessential Viennese thing to do. So here I am reading the International Herald Tribune and having a little coffee. Another of my favorite things that not too many people know about, or it's not on that first level of sites to be experienced in Vienna, but there was an architect who heard a different drummer beating around the turn of the 20th century. His name was Hundertwasser, and Hundertwasser was a man ahead of his time. He really felt the draw, the siren song, to incorporate nature and natural forms. I mean, this is the Viennese version of Art Nouveau, of organic forms. And look at this building. He's actually incorporated gardens into the building itself. You've got these columns down in the lower left-hand corner that are not, they're all different. They're organically shaped. You've got many organic shapes involved here. Here's another of his buildings. And if you go inside, at the very least on the ground floor, the floor undulates a little bit. I think you can see it a little bit, even the sidewalk here. He wanted you to have the feeling that you were outside. And of course, the ground outside is never flat like a pavement. It's wavy. This is a power station that he designed. I mean, this looks like something that was done in the 1960s, quite frankly, but it's more than 100 years old. Hundertwasser, I love his stuff, and there's a number of them to be seen around town. This is one of my favorite single sites in Vienna. This is the Charles Church. And what's interesting about it is you see this scaffolding and elevator. I'm going to say maybe 15 years ago, they needed to do some restorations up in the dome there. And when they were done, they left the elevator up and charged people to go up into the dome. This is absolutely unique and fantastic. I mean, how many frescoed domes or church ceilings have you stood under, but how often have you ever been able to go up into the dome? Maybe St. Peter's Basilica, St. Paul's, but going up to the top of this elevator and being able to see the scale of the painting and what the artist was up against to make it look right from 100 feet below, it's really a fun and unique experience. So lots and lots to do in Vienna with that free afternoon that you'll have. Back on the boat, sleep overnight, wake up in a new city. That's the beauty, of course, of these river cruises. Is your hotel floats you to where you want to go. We wake up the next day in Budapest. This, of course, is the famous Parliament building on the Pest side, right? Budapest is divided, Buda on one side of the Danube, Pest on the other. Pest is a little more modern town. This is Kati, our fantastic local guide that we use there. Like I said, handpicked everywhere we go. A couple of times on our cruises, we've done a tour of the Parliament. Sometimes we just do a walking tour. There's Budapest is like Vienna. There is so much to choose from that it's, depends on, when we're setting it up, what we decide to do as a group. These are shots of the interior of that Parliament building. Very impressive, as you can well imagine. This is where the Parliament meets in session, like our own Congress. But Budapest has a wealth of stunning architecture. Everywhere you turn, there is some sort of Beautiful building. This is Heroes Square. These are statues of various historical figures in the history of Hungary. And remember that until the 20th century, anyway, Hungary was one of the big, powerful kingdoms of Europe, even before it became part of the Habsburg domains. So a long and storied history that is celebrated here at Heroes Square. This is the market building in Budapest, and I think it's one of the best markets anywhere in Europe. It's huge. It's fun to stroll through and see what they're selling. I call this Budapest fast food, right? Some sort of pretzel bakery good there that this kid's having. I think I mentioned that we have a day and a half there. We have our walking tour of the highlights of Pest, and then the next day we have a morning on the Buda side. So this is the Buda side looking back across the Danube there. There's a funicular that we ride up because Buda is a huge hill on the other side of the Danube, right? This is Buda Castle. Again, a venerated and storied institutional building. This is St. Matthias Church, beautiful Gothic church up on the hillside. There's St. Matthias on his horse in the bottom right-hand corner. And then this is the Fisherman's Bastion. This is just so fun to wander along this bastion walls here and take your own photographs. There's the Parliament building on the other side of the river. Beautiful architecture. And then, of course, free time, right? We'll have a little walking tour, maybe a strudel making demonstration. We see the Fisherman's Bastion, St. Matthias Church, and the Buda Castle on the Buda side. And then you've got some free time to wander around. Here is a bronze statue of Reagan. Why Ronald Reagan? Well, you know, the revolution that takes place in the 90s when the Iron Curtain falls and the Soviet Empire crumbles, allowing Hungary to embrace democracy. Right or wrong, they feel like Ronald Reagan had a big part in that, so they celebrate him there. Many monuments, by the way, all over the city. This is my favorite, right? This is Imre Nagy, right? If I'm saying that right, Nagy, who led the Hungarian revolt against Moscow in 1956, right? Which was brutally suppressed by Moscow. Nagy was captured and executed. But again, now that Budapest is free, now that Hungary is free, well, and until recently fairly democratic, they celebrate their heroes of the struggle to achieve that freedom and that democracy. So you've got Reagan and Nagy. On to Bratislava as we start to move back west along the Danube. You know, the particular cruise that I've chosen starts and ends in Passau, and I do that so that we can have those great extensions of Salzburg and Prague and Český Krumlov. So we've headed southeast down the Danube to Budapest, and now we're working our way back west, and we stop in lovely Bratislava. If you've tuned in this week, you've seen my friend Martin. Here he is over on the right with his hands in his pocket with one of my groups. This is again that group where we didn't see much of the sun. There's Martin in front of the State Opera House, giving our group a great tour. Beautiful, beautiful architecture in Bratislava, a variety of architectural styles. Here's that remaining gate tower that Martin talked about on, I guess it was last week we had Martin on talking about Bratislava. And you may, if you did tune into when we were talking, if I had to choose one word to describe Bratislava, it would be whimsical. I mean, there are these great public statues everywhere, these beautiful bronzes. And this, of course, is everybody's favorite, certainly mine, World War I soldier popping out of a manhole, right? Here's the doorman welcoming people into a hotel. I think this is some Slovak literary figure. I'm not really sure. I think that's a frog on his shoulder, and he's got a snail at his feet. Here's Napoleon, or at least a Napoleonic soldier, and another kind of soldier. And this sense of whimsy isn't just in the public art. I mean, this is some business that's wanting to participate, and they've put a couple of sock characters out front. Just good fun. Here's the Narnia pub. So there's a creativity and a whimsy about Bratislava that I just love, and makes it, for me, stand out from the other stops along the tour. I mean, speaking of which, the next stop is Linz, right? The next and final stop. Typical, beautiful public square where they've closed off traffic to the main square there. If there's a nice day, we head up to the Postlingberg, right? And this is the Postlingberg, easy for me to say, pilgrimage church. This is just the single great hill that rises up on the other side of the Danube, affording a beautiful view back across the city of Linz. So at the end of our cruise, and here I'll use my cursor if you can pick it up here, the blue line starts in Passau, where we began. If you see, the bottom left-hand corner was Salzburg, right? We bust up to Passau and came down all the way Bratislava and Budapest in the bottom right-hand corner. And then we came back, Bratislava, Vienna we did on the way down, Melk on the way down, Linz on the way back. Then we're picked up in the morning and we head up to Prague, which is up at the top of our map here. This route does not include, if you look here just to the right of the blue line, you see Český Krumlov. That is our first stop after leaving the river cruise. Český Krumlov is a charming medieval village that time forgot, right? There was no industry here. There was no reason to spend money here when the Soviets controlled what was then Czechoslovakia. And so it's a time capsule. It's been beautifully preserved, little winding streets, and a castle that dominates up on the hill. So we stop here for, I guess you'd say, a glorified lunch stop, several hours, a couple hours for everybody to explore on their own, lunch, and then a tour of the castle before we leave town. The guide that takes you, the docent that takes you to the castle, has these gigantic keys, and she needs those giant keys to open a couple of these truly medieval doors inside the castle. And this is your view back down into that historic town center that's in the bend of the river here. Can't say the name of the river just off the top of my head. Anyway, you get a sense here, just this gorgeous little time capsule medieval village of Český Krumlov. The last stop on the tour, of course, is mighty Prague. Prague has become an explosively attractive and popular tourist destination. The first time I went in the 90s, it was just waking up from the I don't want to overstate it, but the oppressive rule of communism there. This is a city that just sprang to life. And very, very famously, Prague was never bombed during World War II. So it's got this preservation of beautiful, beautiful architecture everywhere you turn. This is the city hall and the astronomical clock. Very, very famous. You can see, the little figurines around. Couple times a day, the figurines come do a little dance. It's sort of like the Glockenspiel in Munich. This is the Tin Church, T-Y-N, beautiful church there on the square. This might be one of the most beautiful central squares in all of the world, certainly in Europe. Just beautiful Art Nouveau. This is the Jan Hus Memorial in the middle. For those of you who don't know who Jan Hus was, he was burned at the stake as a heretic for saying a lot of the same things that Martin Luther will say 100 years later. That's a whole historical story for another day, but he's a hero of the Czech Republic because he spoke out for freedom and independent thought, just like Martin Luther would do 100 years later. Gorgeous square. There's the Hus monument again off to the right. So you can see you're just seeing another angle on the same square. And then, of course, while we're there, we will see all the main sites. This is the Charles V bridge, right? Charles V puts his stamp on Prague, and then the big Prague Castle Fortress, this massive building complex with St. Vitus Cathedral popping up in the middle of it. But all of this that tops this hill on the other side is the Prague Castle. You can see on the bridge that it's lined with statues. This is John Nepomuk, who is sort of the patron saint of Prague, but every statue is worthwhile. I'll go back real quickly. Also, you'll notice there's vendors on the bridge. This is the place where buskers will perform. So Prague is a place you never have to sort of wonder, if you have a free evening, what should we do? Because if you go out on the bridge, there's going to be people making music, doing magic tricks, comedy, swallowing swords, whatever sort of buskers have come up with for entertainment. The bridges, there's always a lot of action there. Up on Prague Castle, the old castle building, we do a guided tour in there, right? This was the great banqueting hall. Prague Castle is probably most famous for the defenestration. I think that's my favorite word in the English language, defenestration. It comes from the Latin. It means to be thrown out of a window. Very, very famously, a couple of representatives of the Catholic Habsburg family were tossed out of the windows. You see that going on in the scene here. They survived. Apparently they landed on a pile of dung, and that broke their fall, and nothing. They did not die. I'm sure they had some broken bones, but it's the event that starts the 30 Years' War, the great religious war of the 17th century, 1618 to 1648, which devastates all of Europe because everybody gets involved. And the Habsburgs, who were very Catholic, very conservative, they are the standard bearers for the Catholic forces, and they'll take the fight to any Protestant armies anywhere. But it all starts right here at Prague Castle with people being tossed out of the window being defenestrated. This is the Golden Lane, part of the castle complex up there. The charming part, right? It's just this cute little lane that's got all these nice little shops and art studios to pop into. Really lovely. And then, of course, the signature piece up on the hill is St. Vitus Cathedral. This is the great state cathedral of the Czech Republic. Beautiful Gothic building, and inside, always impressive. Here's the tomb of John Nepomuk that I mentioned before. Tons and tons of solid silver there with his silver casket. There he is again. And my favorite part about St. Vitus and what sets it apart from other Gothic cathedrals is that they replaced some of the traditional stained glass in the early 20th century with the designs by Alfons Mucha. Mucha is an artist of the early 20th century. He's from Prague. He's got some beautiful, beautiful art. I'm going to show you a little bit more in a minute. Also on that side of the river up on the castle hill is the Loretta Church. Just a beautiful, beautiful church there. The next tour activity that we engage in while we're in Prague is to spend a good half a day exploring the Jewish quarter, right? Very famous part of Prague was populated by the Jews before a vast majority of them were hauled away by the Nazis in World War II. But there's a really important historic presence here. We'll visit a synagogue or two. This picture is in one of the synagogues where they've turned it into a memorial for those who were hauled away. These are the names of all the people who were taken to the concentration camps and perished there. I wanted you to see the names, but I think the next image is a more moving version of that. Here's my group in the foreground, and you can see how many names there are. You can see how powerful this is as a memorial as you pass through this long hallway, and there's just like a wallpaper of names of those who were taken away. And then you go out into the cemetery, and this is the most powerful moment of this part of the tour, I think, because the Jewish cemetery there is so evocative, so emotionally powerful. When you see all of these headstones that have near toppled over, it's just such a moving experience. If anybody's been to Berlin, there's a modern memorial there that is inspired by this particular cemetery. I forget the story. You hear it in Prague of why there's all these graves on top of graves on top of graves, and with the settling of the soil, they've all gotten, sort of toppled over, or at least partially so. Just a powerful experience there. So for me to recap, we have a half-day tour up on Prague Castle and its surroundings. We have a walking tour of the city, the historic center, and some of the markets, and some of the other historic squares. I'll show you a couple of pictures of those things. And then our tour of the Jewish quarter there. Then you've got a couple of afternoons free to explore on your own. And like I said, Prague is this cornucopia of architectural styles. This is the Powder Tower, part of the old medieval walls. So there's classic Gothic. This is the Rudolphinium. This is the venue of the Prague Philharmonic Orchestra and other, it's a theater venue for a number of things, but the orchestra has its home here. That looks like early Baroque to me. In your explorations, you'll want to try some of the local specialties like Prague ham, selling it right on the square, the main square there. This is Tridelnik. This is a traditional Czech pastry where they wrap the dough around these wooden rods and cook them that way. It's a sweet treat, right? Sugar, cinnamon, etc. Art Nouveau. Boy, Prague might be one of the best Art Nouveau cities in all of Europe. Just every time you turn around a corner, there's something to catch your eye, something beautiful. This is the Lenin Wall, right? This was just an ordinary wall that some young people started using as a venue for graffiti inspired by John Lennon. So there's lyrics from Beatles tunes, there's things that John Lennon said, and eventually when you get into the 90s, the late 80s and the early 90s, when the transition to democracy is beginning to happen, this becomes a place where political slogans start to appear rather than just things that John Lennon might have said in one of his songs. It becomes a rallying place for the voices of democracy. I had mentioned Alphonse Mucha before. I highly recommend, just like I do the Hundertwasser houses in Vienna, in a free time explorations in Prague, go to the Mucha Museum, right? You see his very, very distinctive style of art. He became famous in Paris, but he returns to Prague. This is the Municipal House, another great example of Art Nouveau in Prague. There's a little bit more of a close-up. We're winding up here in just a moment. This is the National Museum, right? It's sort of a Renaissance building. And it is at the top of Wenceslav Square. This is the square where, I don't remember what year it was, in the early 90s, where the democracy movement takes off after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. That spirit of democracy and freedom spreads throughout those former Iron Curtain countries. And it was in this square that all the university students gathered and took out their keys and were shaking their keys and basically symbolically saying, take your keys and go, right? It's time for you to go to the communist powers that be. So this is, I call this the proximity experience. Yes, it's a lovely square that's planted with flowers. The buildings, some on the either side are okay, but what's the value in standing in this square is hearing that story and knowing that that moment in history took place on this pavement where you're standing. It's quite impressive. Prague, of course, is the home of Franz Kafka. So this is the attribution, the monument to the great writer Franz Kafka, who anybody who's read any of his works knows was a little bit off the wall. So he would love, I think, this monument to him. I mentioned the variety of architecture that's available to be seen. This is called the Dancing House, obviously a modern building, the Dancing House. And then I could never talk about Prague without mentioning the opportunity for music. Hearing live music or some sort of unique theater experience is easier in Prague than anywhere else in the world. As you walk around with your sightseeing during the day, there's people on every corner handing out brochures and stuff, or you can go to the tourist information office, which is right next to the teen church that I showed you earlier with those beautiful spires. And the first time I went to Prague back in the 90s, I would just, as I wandered around sightseeing, I would take these brochures and then I'd sit someplace warm. I was there in November, it was cold. I'd sit someplace warm and have a coffee or a meal, and I'd go through and I'd say, okay, I'm going to go hear the Four Seasons tonight in this beautiful church. I'm going to go see a black light theater, something completely unique to Prague. I'm going to go do this, do that. I mean, every night I did something live, and back in the 90s, it was incredibly inexpensive. I've mentioned how explosively Prague has become touristed and popular with everybody from Americans to Germans to other Eastern Europeans. So the days of things being inexpensive are over, but easy, absolutely still the case. And my last slide here is just some people that were on one of my crews. This is up where we had lunch in a pub up by the Loretta Church and the Prague Castle. Pivo is the Czech word, or I believe the Slavic word for beer. Of course, the Czech Republic is famous for its Pilsner style beer, and the original Budweiser and Pilsner Urquell, two of the original Pilsner style beers. So you can't really go to Prague without enjoying a beer. And I just wanted you to see that the Prague people are friendly and engaging, and it's easy to make friends. And as I wrap up talking about this particular tour, the cruise, along with Prague and Salzburg, I'm metaphorically raising my glass to all of you and saying, keep on traveling and travel with intent. We'd love to see you on the Danube cruise this year or in a future year when the pandemic is completely over and gone. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.